Hey guys, Shabbat Shalom. Hopefully you can hear me okay. It's still Shabbat here where I am on the West Coast. Might not be where you are in the world, but Shabbat Shalom. Happy Thanksgiving weekend to all the Americans joining us today. Happy, what is this, second day of the Christmas season, I guess, if you start from day after Thanksgiving. Hope you all had, for you Americans out there, wherever you are in the world, hope you had a great Thanksgiving meal. Great time together with the family. Ate way too many calories like I did. Spent some great time with kids and grandkids and parents and grandparents and all the rest. So, who we got on so far? Looks like Jerry's in. Jungle Jerry's in from Central City, Arkansas. Hello from Arkansas. People love it when I call it Arkansas. Carol's here from Western North Carolina. What's up? Nana Scott from Mississippi Gulf Coast. Staying nice and warm down there while we're freezing our tuchuses off here in Northern California. What's up, Victoria? Yo from Wisconsin. Homeopathy from Charlotte, North Carolina. What's up, Tennessee? Emily, how's it going? Emily's just hi. She's either saying hi or she's from Hawaii or both. I don't know. I'm pretty sure she's Canadian, though. What's up, Oklahoma, Colorado, Vancouver, Annapolis? Hats off to y'all. And again, it's great to be back with you. I think it's been, I want to say at least 6 or 7 weeks since I've done a Wire Live. We did, if you were kind of following along, I don't know if any of you, this is not a plug for you to follow me on Twitter or on X, but we were in Italy and spent about 3.5 weeks there. My wife and I did for our 20th anniversary, and ran into some rather interesting and disturbing things while we were there, and had a chance to kind of travelogue those, which the Wire reposted. So if you go back through the Wire feed, if you didn't get a chance to see those, I highly encourage you do. We saw some old vestiges of the Holocaust while we were there, and even going back to the Middle Ages. The earliest Jewish ghettos in Europe were built in Venice, in northern Italy, and some significant increases in the modern revival of that in Palestinian flags and anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist graffiti we found all over Italy. Was really actually rather heartbreaking to see. Ran into a couple of quote-unquote pro-Palestinian rallies, which were actually just anti-Israeli rallies. And we saw that kind of thing all over the country. We went all over Italy and saw it all over. And Italy is not exactly what would be considered one of the more anti-Semitic countries in the EU nowadays. And so that was really disheartening to see, but also an important, I think, experience for us, and something we felt was important to share with you, all our Wire followers. So if you didn't get a chance to see that, go back, check it out. Otherwise, I'm back in the good old US of A. And a lot has been happening over the past couple of weeks since I've been back. The Wire's been pretty busy. And so I thought it'd be good to go ahead and kick off a Wire here and spend some time talking through these things, especially in the shadow of the release of our new documentary in the Covenant and Controversy series, The Great Reign, which I got a chance to see it. It's awesome. You're all going to love it. I hope you all have already signed up for a watch party. If you have not signed up for one in your area, I encourage you to do so. Or if there's not one in your area, I encourage you to sign up to host one and invite friends and neighbors and fellow church members and family members and coworkers and the homeless guy down the street, whoever you feel comfortable letting into your home for a great time watching a great film. And it was a pleasure and honor and a privilege to be a part of it. It was almost, we shot it almost a year and a half ago. I mean, the film has been in the works for like 6 years now, guys. Like, we started the pre-production on this in like 2019 after Sheep Among Wolves 2 came out. And needless to say, a lot's happened since then. And so it's providential timing that we're releasing the film now. I think it's coming out at just the right time, but it was quite an arduous process, quite an ordeal to get it done and in the can and uploaded and out on the interwebs for you to watch. So I'm excited it's finally happening. And Lord willing, we'll go on to more film projects next year. Already some of those are percolating in the coffee pot of our minds, so to speak. So that's a plug for our film. And now it's time to get down to brass tacks and talk a little bit about what's going on in the Middle East. I thought it would be best to title this session War and Peace in the Middle East, kind of drawing from Tolstoy's novel, behemoth of a novel, War and Peace. But also, when I was a kid, early 90s was the first Gulf War, and there was a saying among, young people at that time, peace in the Middle East. You give the peace sign, peace in the Middle East. And I remember that to this day. I wasn't old enough to serve in the military at that time, but had some friends who had older siblings that were. And, that was a big thing that they did. They would sign off, their letters and everything when they would, write a letter to somebody, or when they say goodbye to somebody, it was peace in the Middle East. Well, it would seem that we are getting very close to something that at least looks like, at least resembles, at least takes the form of peace in the Middle East. And all the humanistic dreams and aspirations of mankind, maybe it appears at least on the surface to be reaching somewhat of an inflection point, of a zenith, this might actually happen now, after we've been talking about it and hoping for it, in this sort of elusive thing, this peace between all these different warring people groups that have been warring together for millennia. Now it looks like it might actually be happening. And some of the most, quote-unquote, hopeful signs of that are this ongoing negotiation between, back-channel negotiation, I should say, between the government of Israel, the state of Israel, and the government of a man by the name of Ahmed al-Shara, better known among his followers as Muhammad Abu al-Jawlani, is his nom de guerre, or his war name, his jihadi name, we might say. And he recently, as you might know if you're following along with not even just The Wire, but current events in general, came to visit New York for the United Nations General Assembly and spoke before the United Nations. The first Syrian leader to do that in quite a while, and became the first Syrian leader in history to visit the White House, and had a sort of bromance-type meeting with our president, with Donald Trump, who sprayed some of his favorite cologne on his neck, which was kind of a shocking thing to do. Surprising that al-Jawlani's bodyguards even allowed that. That's, you would never be able to get away with something like that were it Vladimir Putin or Xi or somebody else. But anyway, had this great meeting with, you could say great, Donald Trump described it as great, meeting with a man who he called very brave, and who he called a great leader, and who the leader of the commanding officer of the United States Central Command, that is all American forces and allied forces based in the Middle East, had a basketball game with him shortly before he left. Him and his defense minister, both of which were active in jihadist organizations seeking to kill American soldiers barely even a decade ago in Iraq and Syria, and who had $10 million bounties on their heads just up until a few weeks ago, now chumming it up on the basketball court with the highest ranked officer in the American military in the Middle East, and the President of the United States in the Oval Office. Unthinkable. If you had said, 3 years ago that, first of all, Bashar al-Assad even would have been overthrown by the wannabe jihadist leader of Syria, but that even beyond that he'd be hanging out and exchanging cologne tips with the United States, with the President of the United States in the Oval Office, I would have said you were smoking something. But here we are, guys. It's 2025, and here we are. It has happened. All just in time for the first anniversary of al-Jawlani's HTS conglomerate militia's overthrow of the Assad regime that began just yesterday as he broke out of Idlib province and started driving down the number 5 highway, number 4 highway going towards Damascus. And there were Homs fell and Aleppo fell and all these big cities that had been elusive to the Syrian revolution for over a decade suddenly were just falling like dominoes. And he breaks out of Idlib with support, of course, from the Turks. And within just a couple of weeks, less than 2 weeks, December 8th, 2024, had taken Damascus and gotten Assad's top leadership to surrender to him. So, shocking turn of events, and we're still, the region's still kind of reeling from this and still kind of rebalancing out after that incredible event. There were kind of 2 events we could say in the last year that have really upset the balance of the Middle East. One of them being the overthrow of the Assad regime by the Sunni Islamist conglomerate of HTS. And you could say the reduction and even in some places the disintegration of the Shia conglomeration in the Middle East, which is led by the Islamic Republic of Iran, its arm of the Revolutionary Guard Corps, specifically the Al-Quds Force, which is the part of the Revolutionary Guard Corps that leads its foreign operations throughout the region. Really saw almost all of its proxies fall apart. In Hezbollah being completely decimated, top leadership and its so-called elite force, Rawalin force, completely decimated by the IDF. The subjugation, you could say, really in some ways I want to call it castration, might be too strong of a word, but really the subjugation of the Houthis in Yemen, where they've basically bowed out of the fight now. And you have Hamas completely encircled and kind of relegated to really just a quarter, maybe a third of the Gaza Strip, completely kowtowed, and the rise of several anti-Hamas Muslim militias in the Gaza Strip that the IDF is coordinating with in the so-called yellow zone, the 60 or so % of the Gaza Strip that the IDF controls. You've got Hamas completely abandoning what's left of its Rafah brigade underground, several hundred fighters just left to die. And so that whole proxy force of Iran completely, you could say maybe with the exception of Iraq, which doesn't border Israel, obviously, completely subdued. And Iran itself, I wouldn't say entirely subdued, but received a very strong shellacking from the Mossad and from the IDF in the recent conflict. And so those 2 sort of seminal events really upset the apple cart in the region, and the boat is still kind of rocking back and forth. The geopolitical boat, you could say, still rocking and still finding its bearings for its direction. And we don't quite see yet where that's going to be. But the result has been twofold. First of all, this sort of uneasy, tense ceasefire, where Iran is pulled back and is kind of licking its wounds, but also beginning to rebuild for what it believes will be its next conflict with Israel, which is looking to be more and more inevitable. And this sort of blitz, this diplomatic blitz on the part of moderate Arab nations and Western nations led by the Trump administration to orchestrate a second round of the Abraham Accords and Abraham Accords 2.0. We've already seen the opening salvo of that in the signature of not Azerbaijan, but Kazakhstan, the home nation of the lovable Borat, to the Abraham Accords along with Israel. Now, Kazakhstan already had it wasn't formal diplomatic normalization, but they had friendly relations with Israel, had an economic agreement. This is kind of upped it to the next level now. Now there's full diplomatic normalization. But they already had, an embassy. They had exchanged ambassadors. So that wasn't really, the highlight of Abraham Accords 2.0. That's just, warming and priming the pump, so to speak. What's expected to be the really big pieces of this next phase of the Abrahamic Accords are Lebanon, which is negotiations there are currently underway, stalled by the, you could say, unresolved issue of Hezbollah, and we'll get back to Hezbollah in a moment. Also, some other smaller Gulf area players, Oman being one of them, is rumored to be in negotiations, back channel negotiations, even Kuwait as well. But the big player, the big one, being Saudi Arabia. And as the Wire reported, as many of you know, the week after al-Jilani was in D.C., the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Kingdom, Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS, who many regard to just be the de facto leader. He's not quite the king yet. His father is still alive. But for the most part, his father has handed over the reins of the kingdom with his father's tacit blessing to MBS. And so MBS came to visit D.C. and once again made overtures in these sort of, press junkets that he did with President Trump, that there are ongoing negotiations that involve, sort of a quid pro quo, give and take, that many believe to be concessions by the American government to allow for a limited civilian nuclear program in Saudi Arabia that include the sale of a certain number of probably modified F-35 fighters, stealth fighters, to Saudi Arabia, something that the state of Israel doesn't like, but probably will have to accept. All of this to bring Saudi Arabia to the table with the Israeli government to bring about normalization, something we should probably expect to see at some point in Trump's administration, Trump's term in the next 3 years or so. One sticking point there is MBS's insistence, in keeping with tradition in Saudi Arabia, that there would not be peace with Israel until the Israeli-Palestinian conflict had been settled and the Palestinian people were at least on the path to statehood. Now, what that means and what that actually looks like and how committed MBS actually is to Palestinian statehood is up for debate. What he actually expects or needs to see in terms of a quote-unquote roadmap or a framework for Palestinian statehood is up to debate. There actually already technically is a framework in place. It's the Oslo Accords that were signed back in 1993. But at this point, Oslo is, for all intents and purposes, dead. And so we're talking about replacing Oslo with a new framework, sort of Trumpian deal of the century type framework that may or may not include the Palestinian Authority as it exists today, which definitely can't include Hamas, at least not as Hamas exists now. But, there's a lot of missing pieces out there. There's a lot of loose ends. And all of those things play together in ways that not anybody, even Donald Trump, can completely control. So one of those questions being, what's going to become of Gaza? What's going to become of Hezbollah vis-a-vis Lebanon? What's going to become of, the ongoing operations against Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other jihadist organizations in the West Bank, the seat of the Palestinian Authority, where the Palestinian Authority has basically lost control. And the leadership of Mahmoud Abbas is disregarded by many, especially younger Palestinians, who see the corruption of the Palestinian Authority and the ineffectiveness of the Palestinian Authority, the impotence of it, and have fallen into the trap of believing the more bellicose, the more action-oriented, you could say, language of jihadist organizations that just want to go after Israel. And this is in much the same way how Hamas won elections in the Gaza Strip in 2005 after Israel withdrew, is making all kinds of promises and seeing like the stronger party compared to the Palestinian Authority. If you held elections, parliamentary elections in the West Bank today, Hamas and its ilk in the Islamic Jihad and Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades and the others would win. They would beat the Fatah party, which is the leading party of the Palestinian Authority, always has been, would beat it hands down. And Abbas knows this. That's why you haven't seen general elections in the West Bank for decades, since the death of since 2004, 2005, I believe. So at this point, it looks like Mahmoud Abbas is the dictator of the West Bank, took over from Yasser Arafat and refuses to relinquish power. And although you'll see Israelis complain about that, the Israeli government knows full well that the devil behind the door in the West Bank is Hamas and Islamic Jihad. And so that's a loose end. That's an unresolved conflict that, although we haven't seen it yet, the West Bank could very much turn, if left to itself, could turn into something like Gaza. And look, Gaza's one thing, but the West Bank bordering Jordan, that's 10 times larger than the Gaza Strip. That is, on the border with Jerusalem, and that has a much larger border with the state of Israel than Gaza does, is a much bigger issue. You just can't afford, Israel cannot afford to let the West Bank fall into jihadist hands. And that's why you've seen this uptick in IDF activity, even in what's considered Zone A, that is the zone of the northernmost zone of the West Bank that's supposed to be controlled by Palestinian security forces, the IDF even working there because it knows it can't leave any part of the West Bank in the Palestinian Authority's hands. It has to be able to operate anywhere in the West Bank against jihadists and sort of stem the tide and keep the lid on it. So that's an issue for Israel that remains unresolved. Gaza even remains unresolved, although Hamas is completely subdued and surrounded and is largely cut off at this point. They're still there. The majority of the civilian population of Gaza lives in their territory. And there's the unresolved question of what to do with Hamas, being that there's no chance really at this point of Israel entering into a second phase of the ceasefire where Hamas is going to lay down its arms, kind of like the IRA did in the Good Friday Accords back in the late 90s in Northern Ireland, and have joined some kind of peaceful political process. It's just not going to happen. You might get Hamas to tacitly give up its rockets. It's not going to lay down its AK-47s and its RPGs. It's not going to completely disarm and join some kind of peaceful political process. It's just not in their DNA. And even if you get a large faction of Hamas to do so, there's going to be a breakaway faction that doesn't. And so jihadism is not going to die in the Gaza Strip. And the question of what do you do there? Do you have some kind of multinational Arab force that comes in for peacekeeping? That's been floated with, Egypt, which used to control the Gaza Strip, or the UAE, or, even Saudi Arabia, or other nations. Turkey's obviously volunteered several times and been turned down by Israel to lead a force like that. So what happens with the Palestinian territories factors into the negotiations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And the Trump administration, behind the scenes, you can bet, really, really wants this deal and is applying a lot of pressure, giving a lot of both sticks and carrots on both sides. And you can bet is pressuring Bibi Netanyahu's government, which includes, he has a sort of centrist to rightist, right wing government It's sort of this conglomeration of all these different parties that go anywhere from sort of the secular centrist parties, sort of right centrist parties in Likud, his party, all the way into, these really far, you could say extremist even, Zionist parties, and ultra-Orthodox parties and so on, that refuse, just flat out, to have any kind of peace agreement, let alone Palestinian state, any kind of peace agreement with the Palestinian Authority, let alone giving Palestinian sovereignty or even a roadmap to Palestinian sovereignty, especially post October 7th, isn't even a popular proposition in Likud. So you've got all of these sort of pressures and promises being made by the Trump administration, the art of the deal president, who is really trying to make this happen, and wants to see possibly the greatest peace deal in the history, in modern history at least, the ultimate Arab-Israeli peace deal between the Israelis and Saudi Arabia that would sort of cement a roadmap for Palestinian statehood. Now, what MBS is actually going to demand in the end in terms of that remains to be seen. I still believe a lot of what he espouses, publicly at least, is lip service for the sake of his own people, who, remember, all of these sort of moderate Arab regimes, whether it's Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Jordan, have to walk this very thin tightrope of, they have their regimes have very good relationships with all Israeli governments going back decades, at least behind the scenes. But the majority of their population is very anti-Israel. And so they have to walk this sort of tightrope between working with the Israelis and seeming like they're, pro-Palestinian, at least, if not anti-Israeli to the majority of their population. Saudi Arabia is no exception to that. Jordan especially, which has a very large population of Palestinians, of Arabs who were expelled from British Mandate Palestine after 1948, 1967. And Egypt all have to walk that tightrope. And so at the same time, MBS is looking at the sort of regional geopolitical chessboard, and sees all of these different Muslim leaders in the region vying for the title of like Muslim protector protector of the Muslim world. The Ayatollahs of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei is one of those contenders. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey always talks like he's the protector of Arab Palestinian Muslims in Gaza and in the West Bank. And so MBS wants to throw his hat in the ring and really sort of outflank Erdogan, who is one of his regional competitors, as well as Iran, who is his regional out-and-out enemy. And by doing that, he seeks to also be the protector of the sort of moderate but still equally committed protector of Arab Palestinians. And so if you're Israel, who do you want ultimately as a protector of Arab Palestinians in the region? Turkey? No. Iran? No. Saudi Arabia? Yeah, we can accept that. And so once again, there's this sort of push, this sort of like almost like a tractor beam pulling the state of Israel into this peace deal to say, yeah, let's make some concessions. Let's maybe violate some of our, common sense here, maybe even our better judgment, to take this peace deal because we'd rather have this deal with Saudi Arabia than we would be fighting a multi-front war against both Iran and Turkey. And Israel increasingly sees itself on a war front with Turkey in Syria, and by extension in Lebanon, which is the other big topic to talk about today, the ongoing you could say, sequence of events unfolding in Syria. Not only with the ascension of al-Jilani and the subjugation of Syrian minorities, the Alawites and the Druze, he has not been able to quite have the same kind of dictatorial authority he'd like to have in the Druze and Alawite coastal regions. He's been somewhat subdued by Israeli military action in southwest Syria, and also pressure from the Americans saying, hey, dude, back off. At the same time, though, he has outmaneuvered them politically. He has outmaneuvered the Kurds in Syria politically, and kind of put everybody in a position where he doesn't have any real internal military threats at this point. Everybody's in sort of this sort of fragile ceasefire. We've seen, even just recently within the past couple of weeks, an uprising in Alawite territory yet again. In Homs neighborhoods, Alawite neighborhoods in Homs, there was a crime committed against Bedouin Arabs. A Bedouin Arab family was murdered. Whether or not they were murdered by Alawites isn't known for sure, but that was the narrative anyway, which led to a pogrom against Alawites in the city, which led to street marches, street demonstrations across the coastal areas in Latakia and other Alawite majority cities along the coast, which were quickly repressed by al-Jilani's HTS security forces. So there's this sort of uneasy balance between Alawites and Druze don't have the sort of independence, federal autonomy that they should have in Syria, like the Kurds do. But at the same time, al-Jilani doesn't quite have the freedom to massacre them and subjugate them militarily as he would like to. So there's this sort of uneasy balance in Syria right now. But nonetheless, behind the scenes, he continues to both politically and militarily play as many cards as he can to maintain authority within his own borders. And so recently, just last month or month before, inked this deal with Mazloum Abdi, the leader of the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish-led militia in northeast Syria. And so at this point, he has this sort of upper hand, you could say, where he's free to kind of rebuild his country, build up his military forces. He's free to make both economic and security deals with Western nations. Damascus now has 24/7 electricity for the first time in over a decade. And his government has made a big deal out of that. And in recent celebrations in Damascus and other HTS stronghold cities like Aleppo, there's been a very large turnout on this anniversary of the takeover, of his regime's takeover of Damascus. Hundreds of thousands of people out in the street celebrating. You never saw anything like that under the Assad regime, at least not voluntarily. And so he is very, very popular among Sunni Arabs in Syria. And The Wire just reposted a video today taken in Damascus during those celebrations, in which there was, yet again, we've seen this multiple times since the HTS takeover of Syria, yet again, chants among the HTS security forces of Khyber Ya Yahud. Or remember Khyber, O Jews, the armies of Muhammad are waiting or coming. And this is a reference back to one of the very earliest campaigns of Muhammad against the Jewish tribe of in Khyber in the Arabian Peninsula. Really was one of the earliest victories of his Islamic State, and one of the earliest examples, maybe the earliest example of Jews being subjugated as dhimmis, hundreds of them being beheaded. Men and boys down to prepubescence being beheaded in trenches, and women and children being taken as the spoils of war. And so this is a constant reminder, a constant slogan in Sunni jihadist circles. Khyber, Khyber, Ya Yahud. Remember, Jews, what happened to you at Khyber. The armies of Muhammad are coming. So, with all the debate back and forth about al-Jilani, is he truly reformed or not? Is he truly, moderate now or not? I just want to show you here. This is, sorry if I can show you. This is a chart showing all of the different militias that make up Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. These are the militias that overthrew the Assad regime in Syria last December. Just look at the flags and the names of these militias. Turkestan Islamic Party, Mujahideen Gubra Division. Look at what's in all of the flags of these militias. The black flag of Khorasan that has the Shahada in it, this sort of end times apocalyptic prophecy of the Islamic Hadith that the black flags would come from Khorasan. And eventually their road would end in Jerusalem with the conquest of Jerusalem. Same flag as Al-Qaeda, same flag as ISIS. Islamic Jihad Union, Ansar al-Islam, Katibat, which is like the scribes or the students, al-Tawheed wal Jihad, of the good, teaching the good way of jihad. These are the guys that now command and control the government in Damascus. Okay, so you can make the point that al-Jilani left Al-Qaeda in 2016 and created his own Syrian-centric revolutionary movement. But that movement is no less Islamist, is no less jihadist than Al-Qaeda itself. It has no less aspirations for Jerusalem or for jihad against the West than Al-Qaeda or ISIS. It's just, under the leadership of Jilani, much more pragmatic about it. Al-Qaeda and ISIS have no problem showing you their true colors, reveling in their brutality and in their aspirations of jihad to conquer, Israel or conquer the West. They have no qualms reveling in that in their social media, in their highly produced videos, or their social media accounts or their blog posts. Al-Jilani has learned that gets you the wrath of not only Israel, but the armies of the civilized world, of the EU and of the United States and of the Russian Federation and everybody else that doesn't want jihadists at their doorstep. So he's taken a very much more practical and pragmatic approach, which is to be friendly with Western nations, to offer them intelligence, to wipe out his competitors in the jihadist world, to wipe out the remnants of ISIS and the remnants of Al-Qaeda in Syria. And to kind of play both sides of the fence and to bide his time until he's powerful enough to lead such a jihad against Israel and the West, and God forbid actually be successful. So these are the guys that are now visiting the White House. These are the guys that are now making deals with Western governments and Western corporations to rebuild Syria, and have tens of billions of dollars pouring into their economy and making security deals with Turkey and other friendly Islamist nations, including Saudi Arabia, including UAE, are fans of al-Jilani because they see him as a bulwark against the Islamic Republic of Iran. So that's where we're at in Syria right now. And Israel sees that. They're not blind. And there have been several leaders of both political leaders and military leaders of Israel who have been bold enough to say that Turkey is quickly replacing Iran as Israel's greatest enemy, Israel's greatest threat. And they have the foresight to see that with the waning of Iranian power in the region, you have a vacuum that is allowing for the rise of another Sunni jihadist power in Turkey's greatest proxy, which is the government of al-Jilani. And so that's why there have been these sort of skirmishes between the IDF and Turkey. You've had several near misses of confrontation between those two powers in Turkey as Turkey continues to build military bases and joint military bases with al-Jilani's regime inside northwest Syria, and as the IDF continues to occupy parts of and lead military operations in southwest Syria. You have a growing Cold War between those two nations with Syria, with Damascus as the front line. So hence the other diplomatic blitz underway in the Middle East right now, which is not for Syria to join the Abraham Accords yet, although that is also in view, but for there to be a security agreement between Israel and al-Jilani's regime. Just a security agreement that would allow both sides to back off and to avoid a war that could turn into a war between Israel and Turkey. And what that looks like right now is al-Jilani's insistence that the IDF pull back to pre-October 7th, the so-called Purple Line that was established after the Yom Kippur War in 1974, the Purple Line, in the Israeli, which divides the Israeli and the Syrian Golan Heights. Israel controls about 2/3 of the Golan Heights. Syria controls kind of the eastern slopes of the Golan Heights. And so after the fall of the Assad regime last year, the IDF moved into the Syrian part of the Golan Heights, the Quneitra province, and also occupied the Syrian side of Mount Hermon, which is a very strategic location, militarily strategic location that gives Israel radar coverage of that part of Syria, whereas before Iran or whoever, Hezbollah, could fly drones into this sort of blind spot on the far side of Mount Hermon, and then those drones wouldn't be visible until they were fairly close to the Israeli Golan Heights. Now Israel has military outposts along the other side, the far side of Mount Hermon, and has that sort of advantageous position. So militarily, it's a very advantageous position, and Israel obviously doesn't want to give it up. Will they be willing to give it up for the sake of having a security agreement with Syria? Right now, probably no. I mean, those talks have definitely stalled. At least Bibi Netanyahu and his center-right cabinet is not willing to do that. There are many in his cabinet who have a couple of guys in particular in far-right religious Zionist parties who have threatened to quit his government and basically bring the government down if he were to make such a deal with al-Jilani's government and withdraw the IDF from southwest Syria. So Bibi, being the consummate politician, always threading the needle, is keeping those talks alive, but is not, giving Jilani what he's demanding and hoping Jilani will be willing to settle for less. Jilani, being the very astute politician that he is, so far has not been willing to do so, and has been willing to take the lumps when Israel has doled them out, especially when his forces are surrounding the Druze majority province of Sweda. And he has had to sort of accept that as the reality for now. Even just recently, a couple days ago, Israeli commandos went into southwest Syria to go after a couple of jihadists that were planning an imminent attack against the Israeli Golan Heights in a town named Beit Jin. And they went in, arrested these two guys in bed, were on their way out, and then came under fire from probably a dozen jihadists, which now there are reports that maybe those may be militiamen that were linked with HTS. That al-Jilani may have actually leaked the position of those jihadists to the Israelis, basically giving the Israelis the green light to come in and get those guys because they're al-Jilani's competition. Al-Jilani doesn't like other jihadists as competition inside Syria. And then set it up so that his own guys were there and ready to attack the IDF on their way out. And then another squad of Israelis coming in to rescue those guys were attacked, and an officer was injured. I think it was like half a dozen Israeli soldiers were injured, and an officer were wounded in that firefight. About 9 or 10 jihadists were killed. So again, al-Jilani playing both sides of the fence. Potentially, and we don't know this for sure, but it looks very possible he leaked the position of the jihadists to the Israelis, as he often does to both the Israelis and the Americans, to kind of let them do his dirty laundry. So he can kind of, have a degree of separation from it. And then turns around and has, militiamen just 1 or 2 degrees separated from his guys attack the Israelis on their way out. So again, he may not be the most powerful of Middle Eastern leaders on the chessboard yet. He may still be a little horn. Not the little horn. He's a little horn. But he's a very astute politician and military tactician. And he definitely knows how to play both sides of the chessboard, not only for his own political survival, which he has managed to be successful in over the past decade, but for his own political and military success, to find himself in the Oval Office just 1 year after being on the FBI's most wanted list. So we shall see what will happen. It may be that we don't see any kind of security agreement between Syria and Israel with the current Israeli government in place. There are Israeli elections upcoming next year if the government doesn't collapse before that. And for my American friends in the parliamentary form of government, if a particular party doesn't win an outright majority in the parliament, in this case the Israeli Knesset, then you have to have this sort of league of different parties that come together in an alliance to form a majority, in a coalition, what's called a coalition government. And in order to do that, you have to give different party leaders in those different parties positions in your cabinet government, which is what Bibi has had to do, even with some very far right, ultra-nationalist, ultra-Zionist figures in Israel in order to maintain his government. Otherwise, you lose your majority if that coalition falls apart, and you have snap elections where there's a vote of no confidence, and then there has to be another election before the scheduled election for new government. Bibi's trying his best to hold his government together, which means he has to appease the far right parties, and which that means he can't give concessions that he otherwise might be willing to give, in order to have the security deal with Syria, or in order to normalize with Saudi Arabia. He can't do it right now, and politically survive. But there are elections in Israel next year. We don't know what that's going to look like. All the hostages are home, so the biggest political hot potato in Israel is resolved. There are at this point only 2 deceased hostages remaining in Gaza. There is a mix of support for the way the government and the IDF has handled the war, but also this sort of lingering disgust at the fact that the current government allowed October 7th to happen in the first place. We're still in the same government that was in place 2 years ago when October 7th happened. And typically what will happen in governments or democracies like this is after a major political and military failure, which it's safe to call October 7th a both political and military failure in Israel, it's very common to see a turnover in the government after that. And the ruling government get voted out in the next election, or in despotic governments to see that government overthrown. So if that kind of precedent holds true, we could very well see a turnover in government in 2026. Whether that's to the more leftist, centrist, blue and white party, or some other kind of crazy coalition like we saw before Netanyahu came back into power, it remains to be seen. But that kind of political shift in Israel could be what allows for all of these sort of pending diplomatic deals to be finalized, to be clenched. One with Syria and another with Saudi Arabia, because a more centrist or leftist government in Israel would be by nature more willing to make concessions for those kinds of deals. So all eyes on 2026, guys. We'll see what happens. Meanwhile, things continue to escalate in Lebanon. Hezbollah continues to rebuild. Israel continues to escalate its military campaign in the so-called ceasefire, recently taking out Hezbollah's number 2, its chief of staff, in the suburbs of Beirut, its biggest strike in Lebanon since the last war. Since the last Israeli-Lebanese war. Really, that was the most devastating blow to Hezbollah that Israel could have inflicted. In that Hezbollah's new Secretary General, after the death of Hassan Nasrallah, whose name I don't remember, he's like, the third one after the last 2 or 3 were taken out by Israel in the war, depended heavily on Hezbollah's chief of staff, who was a hardened veteran and a brilliant military tactician, the former leader of its Radwan force. Really was, for all intents and purposes, the military leader of Hezbollah, whereas their current, Secretary General is just sort of a figurehead. So taking out their chief of staff, their most hardened battle veteran, was the most devastating blow to Hezbollah that Israel could have inflicted in just one airstrike. So, and notice zero response from Hezbollah so far. They threw out their usual threats of, hey, we'll strike back at a time of our choosing, but not a single rocket, not a single missile, not a single mortar across the border. And that shows you that Hezbollah is just not ready to go back to war yet. And nor does Israel want to go back to war in Lebanon right now necessarily either, but they're in a much better position to do so. Meanwhile, Hezbollah just got $1 billion from Iran, which can't even afford to reinforce reservoirs for its own people who are running out of water. And guys, if there are people that we should be praying for in the Middle East right now, there's lots of them. But especially put on your prayer list, and I'd say pray, weekly along with me for the people of Iran, because it's just one thing after another for those poor people. 90% of which can't stand their own regime. They do anything to overthrow it. They just don't have the inertia yet for that to happen, although we see that building, even with some military defections of officers on social media flying the old royal flag of the Shahs. Nonetheless, the momentum just isn't there yet for a coup, for an overthrow of the regime. Meanwhile, they just have to continue to sit under this regime that oppresses them and that is so incompetent and so malfeasant that they can't even provide water for their own people. They haven't even been able to provide basic services for their own people. So let's pray for the people of Iran and pray for the end of this regime sooner than later. But then what? After the end of the regime, then what? I mean, that's the big question. So, all right, I think that's enough as far as an update for today. We're just about at the hour mark. Hopefully my rambling was somewhat informational and inspirational to you. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to field some questions here before I let you go for the night. So once again, we see the Shia jihad waning in the Middle East, and we see the Sunni jihad rising. And that's no less comforting than the rise of the Shia crescent. So it's just a different form of the beast that begins to wake up in the Middle East. All right, questions? Any questions? Not Arkansas, LOL. Sorry about that. I couldn't help myself. What's up, Ohio? What's up, El Paso? Yep, through Palestine, quote unquote. Jelani the Assyrian on the rise. He may well be. If you guys haven't seen yet, I did a live wire. I think it was on New Year's Day last year that went through Daniel 11. And we kind of talked about the ways that Abu Muhammad al-Jilani resembles the King of the North, the final King of the North of that passage in verses 21 through 25. That's not to say he is, and the jury's out. Does he resemble that man? Certainly. In many ways he does. And so definitely, more than anybody else alive in the world today, is the one to be watching in terms of him making a peace agreement with Israel, whether that's explicitly for 7 years or not. And he's the kind of guy that would, right? For the sake of setting up the age-ending jihad that would come after. Jelani does play both sides, and I cannot understand the Western world. He has blood on his hands in Syria. Absolutely. There's just, I think there's such a... The thing with al-Jilani is just a confluence of different... all these... God kind of brings together all these different things in history to kind of all come together at a central point. And these aren't things that humans can orchestrate. There's no shadowy organization that kind of can thread all these things together. They really are a confluence of different political and economic forces, sometimes even natural forces, natural disasters happening and things like that. They all kind of come together to put historical events on a conveyor belt, like they're just going in this direction and there's no stopping it. And that's what we really see happening with al-Jilani right now. How is it that a card-carrying leader of Al-Qaeda is an ally of the United States of America, not even 25 years after 9/11? How is that even possible? And it's really only because, in this post 9/11 world where we're trying to still figure out how to overcome Islamism and jihadism, we've come to the point where if you can't beat them, join them. Let's pick the friendlier talking jihadis over the angrier talking jihadis. Let's pick the Islamists that give us military targets over the Islamists that are the military targets. And as long as al-Jilani is feeding us, coordinates for ISIS targets and Al-Qaeda targets inside Syria, and as long as he's talking nice and at least teasing peace with Israel, if not actually following through with it, then he's the devil that we're willing to make a deal with against the devil that we want to kill. Iran is one of those devils that we want to kill, the Iranian regime anyway. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are the devils that are still on the hit list. And so we're willing to make political, I'd say even moral compromises. We as a nation, as the United States, and we as the Western world are willing to make those kinds of political and moral compromises at our peril. And it's a gamble. And I think it's a gamble that's ultimately going to backfire. So, all that being said, the hopeful message I'll leave you with is the Lord is in control of these things. He is the one ultimately, as it says in Proverbs, leading the hearts of kings like a stream of water. And he's leading them all, yes, into the greatest tribulation at the end of the age. But through that tribulation, through that time of hard labor comes the birth of the new age, comes the birth of the Messianic kingdom and the return of our Messiah. So that is ultimately the Lord's end game. And the rage of the nations of Al-Jilani and Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the Ayatollahs and every other political leader be damned, literally, because the Lord will have the last laugh, according to Psalm 2. All right, guys, we love you all. Thanks for joining. Thanks for sticking it out with us on a Saturday night. We'll try to do this again more often. We kind of fell off the wagon there for a few weeks while I was in Italy, but Lord willing, we'll kind of jump back on the wagon and at least have lives once a month, if not more often. Probably monthly will be our regular cadence. And then as big events happen, of course, we'll jump on with you all and give you a chance to talk it out. Talk it out, ask questions, and give support and encouragement to one another. So, all right, next Friday, the great rain. Speaking of the Lord's ultimate end game, that's what it's all about, y'all. So be there. I think it's 7 p.m. Is it 7 p.m. Eastern time? Somebody in the chat can probably correct me. Yours truly and a few others might jump on for a quick live stream Q&A after the showing. Otherwise, I'll be watching along with all of you. Looking forward to it all. Love you guys. Blessings to you. Maranatha.